They abandoned a lifeless puppy at a campout, but a stray cat's unbelievable act shocked everyone. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as a group of campers packed up their belongings. Laughter and chatter filled the air as they folded their tents, tossed empty snack wrappers into a bag, and loaded their gear into their vehicles. The campsite, once lively, was now quieting down as the group prepared to leave. But among the trampled grass and scattered embers of the dying fire, something remained behind. Something small, fragile, and utterly alone. A tiny puppy, barely a few weeks old, lay curled up near a pile of discarded trash. Its fur was matted with dirt, its body shivering from the cool evening breeze. The campers, who had played and laughed around the fire just moments ago, got into their cars without a second glance. Engines roared to life, headlights illuminated the darkening campsite, and within minutes, the place was deserted. Dust swirled in the air as the sound of their vehicles faded into the distance. And then silence. The puppy had been abandoned. For a few moments, the little pup lifted its head, ears twitching as if hoping to hear the voices of those who had just left. But no footsteps returned, no familiar hands reached out to scoop it up. Its whimpers were swallowed by the vast, empty forest. It had already been weak before. Now, with no food, no water, and no warmth, its tiny body was giving up. Its ribs pressed against its thin skin, each breath slow and shallow. It had clearly not been cared for. Perhaps it had been the runt of a litter, unwanted and discarded like a piece of trash. Flies buzzed around its motionless body, landing on its cracked nose. Its eyes, dull and lifeless, barely blinked. It had no strength to move, no energy to cry out. A deep chill settled in as the sun dipped below the trees. The puppy tried to curl tighter, but its frail body ached. Its heart beat weakly, struggling to keep going. If help didn't come soon, it wouldn't make it through the night. Darkness crept in, bringing with it a deep, eerie silence. The once busy campsite now felt like a graveyard, filled only with the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The puppy didn't move. Its small chest barely rose and fell, its breathing so shallow that it was almost unnoticeable. The world around it was empty, uncaring. There were no humans to help, no warm hands to pick it up and whisper comforting words. Hours passed. The night grew colder. The forest was alive, but not in the way the puppy needed. Shadows shifted between the trees. Unseen creatures moved through the undergrowth. The wind howled through the branches, sending a sharp chill through the air. The puppy's body was growing stiff. Its little heartbeat slowed, its eyelids heavy. It was slipping away, alone and forgotten in the dirt. And then, something changed. A soft rustling. A pair of glowing eyes watching from the darkness. Presence approaching, moving carefully, cautiously. Not a human. Not a predator. A cat. A stray cat. And what it did next would change everything. The night had settled completely, wrapping the abandoned campsite in a blanket of shadows. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant calls of nocturnal creatures. The little puppy lay still, its body barely clinging to life. The cold air pressed against its frail form, stealing away what little warmth remained. Then, from the darkness, something moved. A pair of glowing eyes flickered between the trees, reflecting the pale moonlight. They were low to the ground, watchful, calculating. The figure moved silently, stepping cautiously through the grass, barely making a sound. A stray cat, thin but agile, the feline had spent years surviving alone in the wild. It was no stranger to the harshness of life. Hunger, danger, and the need to always stay alert. It had learned to avoid humans, to fend for itself, to never trust too easily. But tonight, something was different. The cat's sharp eyes locked onto the tiny, motionless bundle lying in the dirt. Its ears twitched, picking up the faint, almost non-existent breathing. It took another step forward, then another, tail flicking as it studied the helpless creature before it. This was not food. This was not a threat. This was something else entirely. The cat could have ignored the puppy. It should have. Survival was a lonely game, and this kitten-like creature was of no use to it. But something stirred deep inside the feline, an instinct that defied its usual nature. Cautiously, it crept closer. It lowered its nose, sniffing the pup's tiny, shivering body. A weak scent of fear and sickness filled its senses. The little creature was barely alive, its warmth fading with every second. The cat let out a low, uncertain sound, almost as if testing for a response. No movement, no reaction. The cat nudged the puppy gently with its paw. Nothing. A chill ran through the night, making the cat's fur bristle. The puppy would not survive like this. It was too weak, too cold. And for some reason the cat did not understand. It could not walk away. The feline did something extraordinary. Instead of leaving, it curled itself around the lifeless puppy. Pressing its warm body against the pup's frozen frame, it wrapped its tail around it like a protective barrier. Then, it did something that shocked even itself. It began licking the puppy's fur, cleaning away the dirt and grime, trying to stimulate life back into the tiny creature. With every slow, deliberate stroke of its tongue, it was as if the cat was willing the puppy to hold on. A stray cat, hardened by survival, showing kindness to a dying creature. It was an act of pure instinct, but not one of hunger, or fear, or self-preservation. This was something else, something rare, something incredible. And soon, the cat's actions would lead to something no one could have ever expected. The stray cat refused to give up. It curled around the puppy, pressing its warm body against the tiny, lifeless form. Its rough tongue worked tirelessly, licking the dirt-streaked fur, trying to stimulate any sign of movement. Every few seconds, it nudged the puppy's head, its green eyes filled with desperation. But the pup remained still. A shiver ran through the cat's thin body as the cold night pressed in. The wind howled through the trees, carrying an eerie silence that made the cat's mission feel even more impossible. Yet, something inside it, something primal and unwavering, told it not to stop. With a sudden burst of determination, the cat did something truly astonishing. It placed one paw on the puppy's tiny chest, pressing down gently but firmly, then let go. Again, it repeated the motion, mimicking the way a mother cat rouses a weak kitten. It licked the puppy's nose, then pressed against its chest again. Minutes stretched endlessly, but there was still no sign of life. The cat's ears flattened in distress. Was it too late? Had the cruel world already taken this fragile soul? The cat paused, staring at the motionless puppy. Then, as if guided by something beyond mere instinct, it lifted its head and let out a long, loud cry. It wasn't an ordinary meow. It was desperate, raw, and filled with emotion. A sound rarely heard from a stray. It echoed through the quiet, carrying with it a plea that only the night could understand. The cat waited, its body tense. Then, from the distance, there was movement, faint rustling. The cat's ears perked up. Something or someone was coming. A soft beam of light flickered through the darkness, weaving between the trees. The cat let out another cry, this time with even more urgency. The footsteps quickened, and soon, a voice broke through the night. "Hello? Is someone there?" The cat didn't move from the puppy's side. Its small body remained planted firmly in place, shielding the frail creature from whatever was approaching. It didn't know whether the human was friend or foe, but it had made the call for help. Now it had to trust. The forest was eerily quiet, except for the occasional whisper of wind brushing against the towering trees. The moon cast a pale glow over the narrow dirt path where a lone hiker, Daniel, was making his way back to his campsite. His boots crunched softly against fallen leaves as he adjusted the straps of his backpack. It had been a long day, and he was eager to settle in for the night. Then, just as he was about to take another step, a sharp, desperate cry sliced through the silence. Daniel stopped abruptly, his pulse quickening, his ears strained in the darkness. Had he imagined it? It had sounded unlike anything he had heard before. Not a typical animal sound, not the howl of a wolf or the hoot of an owl. It was raw, almost pleading. A few seconds passed, and then it came again, louder, more desperate. This wasn't just some random noise in the night. Something or someone was in trouble. Instinct took over. He gripped his flashlight, swinging its beam toward the direction of the sound. The dense forest loomed ahead, shadows stretching between the thick trees. He hesitated for only a moment before stepping off the trail, pushing past tangled branches and overgrown bushes. The cries grew louder with each step, filling the air with a haunting urgency. Daniel's heart pounded as he finally broke through the thick undergrowth and into a small clearing. His flashlight flickered across the ground, sweeping over the damp grass and scattered leaves. Then, a pair of glowing green eyes caught the beam. A scrawny, scruffy cat stood in the middle of the clearing. Its fur was matted, and its ribs jutted out from its thin frame. But it wasn't running. It wasn't hissing or retreating like most strays would. Instead, it stood protectively over something small and unmoving, its tail twitching anxiously. Daniel took a careful step forward, his breath catching in his throat. That's when he saw it. Lying beneath the cat was a tiny, frail puppy, completely still. Daniel dropped to his knees, his flashlight trembling slightly as he directed the beam onto the puppy's body. His stomach twisted into a knot. The pup was motionless, its fur damp from the cold night air. He could see its tiny ribs beneath its thin skin, its breathing so faint that for a second, he feared it was already too late. His hands shook as he reached out, brushing his fingers lightly over the puppy's frail body. It was cold, far too cold. But then, just as he was about to lose hope, he felt it. A weak, shallow breath. The puppy was alive, but barely. Daniel's mind raced. He had no idea how long the poor thing had been lying out here, abandoned in the dark. Minutes? Hours? If he didn't act fast, the little creature wouldn't survive much longer. Quickly, he shrugged off his jacket and wrapped the puppy in its warmth. His hands instinctively pulled the small bundle closer to his chest, hoping his own body heat would help. The cat, still standing guard, let out a low, wary growl, its ears flattening as if warning him not to take the pup away. Daniel looked at the stray, amazed by its protectiveness. It had been out here alone, yet instead of running off in search of food or shelter, it had stayed. It had refused to leave this fragile life behind. Softly, Daniel whispered, "I'm here to help, I promise." To his surprise, the cat didn't hiss. It didn't run. Instead, it took a single step forward, and then, in an act that stunned him, it leaped onto his shoulder, its claws gripping his jacket tightly. It was as if the cat had made a decision. It wasn't leaving the puppy behind, and now it wasn't letting Daniel leave without it either. There was no time to waste. Daniel's pulse thundered as he turned on his heel, holding the wrapped puppy close while the cat balanced on his shoulder. His mind raced with a single, urgent thought: he needed to find help. Fast. The forest stretched before him, dark and unwelcoming. His legs moved on instinct, pushing him forward. There was no way of knowing how much time the puppy had left, but one thing was certain. This was no longer just a rescue. This was a fight for survival. Daniel ran through the dense forest, his breath coming in short gasps. His arms cradled the tiny puppy, still wrapped tightly in his jacket, while the stray cat clung to his shoulder, its claws lightly digging into his shirt as if holding on for dear life. Every second counted. The puppy's weak, shallow breaths were barely noticeable, and Daniel couldn't shake the fear that he might not make it in time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he reached the small town on the edge of the woods. His legs burned from exhaustion, but he didn't stop. The dim glow of a neon emergency vet clinic sign ahead was the only thing keeping him moving. He burst through the doors, his voice shaking as he called out, "Please, someone help. It's barely breathing." A veterinarian, Dr. Lillian Carter, rushed over. She took one look at the fragile puppy and immediately sprang into action. Her experienced hands unwrapped the jacket, carefully lifting the tiny body onto the examination table. The cat, still perched on Daniel's shoulder, let out a distressed meow, refusing to look away. Dr. Carter placed her stethoscope against the puppy's chest, her brows furrowing. She checked its gums, pale, its heartbeat weak. Then, she gently pressed around its tiny ribs, and a sharp gasp escaped her lips. She turned to Daniel, her face filled with concern. "This puppy didn't just suffer from exposure," she said gravely. "It's been hurt badly." Daniel's stomach twisted. "Hurt?" She nodded, running her fingers over the pup's frail body. "Its ribs. Some of them feel fractured. There are bruises under the fur, and I'm almost certain it hasn't eaten in days." She sighed deeply. This wasn't just abandonment. Someone abused this poor thing before leaving it to die. The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He looked down at the helpless creature, anger and heartbreak swirling inside him. How could anyone do this? The cat, still watching closely, let out a deep, sorrowful sound, as if it, too, understood the cruelty the puppy had endured. But there was no time for anger. Right now, the puppy needed help. Dr. Carter wasted no time. She placed the puppy in an incubator, adjusting the oxygen levels while an assistant hooked up a tiny four to provide fluids and nutrients. "It's severely dehydrated," she explained, "and if we don't stabilize its body temperature soon, it might not make it through the night." Daniel felt utterly helpless as he watched. His hands clenched into fists. He had found the puppy in time, but now its fate rested in the hands of the vet. His eyes flickered to the cat, which had now jumped onto the counter, watching the scene unfold with an unblinking gaze. Hours passed. The night stretched on. Daniel refused to leave. He sat in the waiting room, his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. What if the puppy didn't wake up? What if he had been too late? The cat curled up beside him, pressing against his side as if offering silent comfort. Then, just as dawn's first light crept through the clinic's windows, Dr. Carter stepped out. She smiled. A small, tired smile, but a smile nonetheless. "He's still weak," she said softly, "but he made it through the night." Daniel exhaled a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Relief flooded through him. The puppy had survived. Dr. Carter gestured for him to follow her. When they entered the recovery room, Daniel's heart swelled at what he saw. The tiny puppy, now resting under a warm blanket, blinked up at him with tired but living eyes. And right beside him, curled up protectively, was the cat. Daniel let out a small, shaky laugh. "I guess he's not going anywhere without his friend." Dr. Carter chuckled. "No, I don't think so." She then turned serious. "The next few weeks will be crucial. He'll need proper care, good food, and lots of love to recover fully." She glanced at Daniel, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think you're up for it?" Daniel didn't even hesitate. He looked at the small, broken creature before him and knew, without a doubt, that he couldn't walk away now. He knelt beside the puppy, gently stroking its head. The cat lifted its head, watching him intently, as if making sure he understood the responsibility he was taking on. "I'm not just up for it," Daniel murmured. "I promise I'll give him the life he deserves." The healing had begun, not just for the puppy, but for all of them. And it was just the beginning. The days turned into weeks, and the fragile puppy that once clung to life in the vet's clinic began to show signs of strength. Under Daniel's care, with proper nourishment, medication, and warmth, the little pup slowly transformed. The once sunken, lifeless eyes began to shine with curiosity, and the weak, trembling body now wobbled on unsteady paws. But what surprised everyone the most wasn't just the puppy's miraculous recovery. It was the bond between him and the stray cat. From the very first night at Daniel's house, the cat refused to leave the puppy's side. While Daniel had expected the dog to be nervous in a new environment, the presence of his feline rescuer seemed to give him comfort. The puppy would curl up beside the cat, nuzzling into its soft fur as if it had always been his protector. The cat, in return, would groom the pup with gentle licks, keeping him warm and reassured. Every milestone the puppy reached, the cat was there. When he took his first proper steps, the cat padded alongside him, almost as if encouraging him to move forward. When he tried his first bowl of solid food, the cat sat beside him, watching protectively. And at night, when Daniel expected the animals to sleep separately, he would always find them curled up together. A picture of trust, love, and unbreakable companionship. One day, as Daniel sat on his porch, watching them play in the yard, he realized something. They weren't just two animals that had crossed paths by chance. They had become family. Word of the unlikely friendship spread through town. The local vet, Dr. Carter, was especially moved by the story and often visited to check on the puppy's progress. One evening, after watching the dog and cat chase each other around the garden, she turned to Daniel with a knowing smile. "You do realize," she said, crossing her arms, "that you haven't just rescued a puppy." Daniel laughed, watching as the cat playfully pounced on the puppy, both rolling into a pile of soft grass. "Yeah," he admitted. "Looks like I rescued a cat too." Dr. Carter nodded. "You've got something special here. They saved each other. And maybe they saved you too." Daniel glanced at the animals again, feeling a warmth in his chest. She was right. Ever since that fateful night at the campout, his life had changed in ways he never expected. He had gone from being a passerby in their story to becoming a permanent part of it. It didn't take long for Daniel to make it official. With a few signed papers at the vet's office, he adopted both the puppy and the cat, giving them the home they had never known. The news spread, and soon, people from all over town came to meet the miraculous pair. The puppy who had once been left for dead had not only survived but had found a brother, a protector, and a best friend in the most unexpected way. As Daniel sat on his porch that evening, the puppy curled up in his lap while the cat rested beside them. He realized that love doesn't always come in the way you expect. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a stray cat who refuses to give up on a lifeless puppy. Sometimes, it comes in the form of an unplanned rescue that turns into family. And sometimes, it comes in the quiet understanding that the best things in life are the ones that find you when you least expect them. As news of the miraculous rescue spread, people from all over were left in awe of the incredible bond between the stray cat and the abandoned puppy. What happened at that isolated campout wasn't just a story about survival. It was proof that compassion exists in the most unexpected places, even among animals. The cat had no reason to save the puppy. It could have ignored the lifeless body and moved on, just as the cruel humans who abandoned it had done. Yet it didn't. Instead, it chose to fight for a life that wasn't its own. That single act of kindness, something that even many humans fail to show, was what changed everything. People often assume that animals operate purely on instinct, driven only by their need for food and shelter. But this story proved otherwise. The cat didn't help the puppy for survival. It helped because it cared. It showed empathy, loyalty, and a level of understanding that left even the most skeptical minds questioning just how much animals truly feel. It wasn't just a rescue. It was a lesson in unconditional love. Daniel knew that this story was bigger than just him, the cat, or the puppy. It was a wake-up call for humanity. If a stray animal could show such kindness and selflessness, then what excuse did people have for turning their backs on those in need? Abandoned animals were everywhere, left to fend for themselves in the harshest of conditions. Some found help, but many didn't. This story had a happy ending, but Daniel knew that wasn't always the case. Determined to make a difference, he started speaking out, sharing the incredible journey of the cat and puppy with anyone who would listen. Social media, local newspapers, and even animal rescue organizations picked up the story, sparking conversations about animal welfare and the responsibility humans have toward them. The message was simple but powerful. If a stray cat could show such kindness, why can't we? People began donating to local shelters, volunteering their time, and even adopting animals that had been abandoned, just like the puppy once was. One act of compassion, one selfless decision, had created a ripple effect of kindness that reached far beyond what anyone had expected. And as Daniel sat on his porch, watching the once lifeless puppy now running and playing with its feline guardian, he couldn't help but smile, because in that moment he knew this story wasn't just about a rescue. It was about hope, about second chances, and most of all, about the fact that even in the darkest of places, kindness still exists. And sometimes it comes from those we least expect.